Have you hit a new stage of growth in your agency, but you're finding that you're actually more stressed, worn out, and you enjoy work less than ever before? That's where Jay Owen, founder and CEO of Business Builders, found himself a few years back. Business Builders is a platinum HubSpot solutions partner and successful agency today, delivering on a variety of services from marketing strategy to video production. But Jay shares that they hit a point where what got them here wasn't going to get them there. That's when they encountered EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system, and it was truly a game changer. Now, to be fair, it hasn't been all smooth sailing since. In fact, Jay shared with me that he wishes that they would have worked with a certified implementer of EOS before trying to install it into their agency on their own for a few years. But it has brought clarity to their vision, structure to their processes, and frameworks for managing talent in their agency they didn't have before. Jay is a wealth of knowledge for fellow agency leaders. In this conversation, he shares no less than 5 solid book recommendations. So with that in mind, let's hear his story of implementing EOS into their agency and start out with the pivotal moment where they were trying to reach that next level of scale.
I had been in business for quite a few years, maybe a decade, and I just crossed over the $1 million mark in sales, and the team had grown just big enough that I couldn't wrap my arms around it all day, and know exactly what was going on all the time. And I was probably more stressed out, more worn out than I was when I hit $100,000 in sales, because back then it was much easier to control. I was doing a lot of the work myself, and now it just wasn't like that anymore. And, I didn't go to college. I went to college for a year and then dropped out. I don't have an official business education. I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and I'm a designer and a creative, and so those are all wonderful things, except they don't lead well towards systems and process. And I was at a event one time with a bunch of other agency owners and leaders, which was awesome. And I just kept telling the same stories of where I was getting stuck. And a lot of it was around just systems, processes, all those kind of things. And I had probably 3 people in separate conversations at the same event say, "Hey, have you read Traction by Gino Wickman?" And I was like, "No." And I read it on the way home, or at least skimmed it on the Kindle. And I was like, this is what I need. I need somebody else to give me a framework that I can just put in place, an operating system to make it all work. And it's changed everything.
I love that. We're going to get into more of your journey and what it's changed. You mentioned there some of the things that you were recognizing in yourself. You were stressed out. You were working harder. You were not enjoying the business as much as the agency owner. What were some of the other symptoms? What were some of the things that you were maybe noticing from clients or from your team that also led you to, I got to figure something out? It ended up being EOS for you, but at that point you just knew you needed something.
Yeah, it's kind of like having a bike in the wrong gear. You're pedaling really hard, but you're not actually getting anything done. And that's what it felt like in businesses. We were losing more clients than we should. We were getting clients because I know how to sell things, but if you sell one thing and lose 2, that's not the right ratio, And so sometimes that was happening in the back end, and then onboarding a new client's a lot more stressful than just caring for an existing relationship, and especially when you don't have good onboarding processes. So I wasn't the only one that was stressed out. The whole team was. And that doesn't lead well to team retention. Nobody wants to be at a place that doesn't run very well. And just picking it up by my bootstraps worked for many years, but it doesn't work in the long term to scale beyond a particular point. And so the pain wasn't just mine. It was the whole team's, and probably clients too. They would see the inefficiencies. Balls would get dropped that shouldn't get dropped. We weren't fixing long-term issues that maybe we needed to address because we never had time to. It was that kind of thing of like, we're just too busy to deal with that. And yet if we would have dealt with some of those things, it would have actually fixed some of the core issues. So the pain wasn't just mine, it was the whole team's.
As someone who has been a part of an agency that has run on EOS, I will echo that it really gave us the ability to get done the day-to-day, but also to work on those longer-term things that are existing issues. We'll even talk about how there's a systematic way to handle issues built right into EOS. But as we go forward, Jay, maybe you could give a little bit of context for folks who maybe haven't read Traction, who aren't familiar with EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. We talk about it a lot here at Teamwork because as we evolved from an agency to a product company ourselves, EOS was instrumental in that. But maybe share with folks at a high level what it is, what are some of the key components, and then we'll continue down this journey in how you guys implemented EOS, some of the bumps you hit in the road, and what maybe you would do differently.
For those that haven't heard of it before, EOS simply stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. It's rooted in that book that I mentioned earlier, Traction by Gino Wickman. And it essentially is just a series of tools and frameworks that allow you to answer and deal with particular things inside of any business, not just agency specific, but agency specific in this case, of how do we evaluate people? And how do we keep score? How do we know, not just for individuals, but for the company or department as a whole, how do we know that we're winning? And if we're not, what do we do about it? When we have issues, how do we deal with those? Is there a system for that, or is it just always the things on fire? And a lot of folks find themselves, feeling like it's always on fire, and they don't have a place to put that issue, so they feel like they got to deal with it right now, even though it's not a right now issue. It's something that needs to be dealt with maybe this week, but not today, not right now. And so it creates a framework of tools for all those things. How do we evaluate people? How do we keep score? How do we keep the company moving forward on big objectives on a quarterly and annual basis, and have those things not get lost in the whirlwind of the day-to-day and the many tasks that do have to get done? How does that happen? What's the system for that? What's the organization? What's the time frame? All that's kind of outlined in EOS in a way that you go, oh, well, this is the roadmap. I'll just do this. And it turns out when you do, it creates a lot of freedom.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit, Jay, for folks who aren't familiar with some of those tools and the frameworks that are elements of EOS that maybe start with the vision traction organizer, the elements of the planning process that roll then to the accountability chart, and some of the other day-to-day things like the L10 meeting format.
So the vision traction organizer is essentially a one-page document, front and back, that outlines just that. What is the vision for the company, and how are we going to gain traction on that? Simple things that we haven't actually always had, like what are our core values? What is our niche? Who are we focused on? What's our guarantee? What are we promising that we deliver and what does our process look like? Then what kind of objectives do we have that are long-term, kind of a 10-year picture? What does that look like? What's it look like over the next 3 years? And then what's it look like the next year and the next quarter? I used to be like really anti long-term planning because I just felt like, man, our industry changes so fast. I don't know what things are going to be like 10 years from now. I mean, when I started this agency, social media wasn't even really a thing. The iPhone wasn't out. Well, things have changed quite a bit, and now we've got AI, not on the horizon, but here. Now what does that do to the industry, But what I've found is that when you have these big objectives for the future, it gives you something to move towards. And if you don't know what you're moving towards, it's hard to get any traction. And in traction, when you think about that idea, going back to the bicycle analogy, like the tires got to connect with the road, Here in Florida, we get a lot of rain as of this time of year when we're recording this podcast, and if you don't have good tires on the road, you can have a problem. Why? Because it's not connecting well to the road. And so you're slipping, the tire's slipping, things aren't going the way they need to be. Well, that's exactly how business is. And so we want the tire to connect well to the road, and the way that we do that is by using some of these tools. The Level 10 leadership meeting, for example, which I have actually here in about an hour and a half from the time we're recording this, we'll sit down as a team of leaders and we'll review a few different things. And we do it every single week for an hour and a half. And if you had told me 10 years ago that I was going to have a recurring meeting, I'm kind of anti-meetings, not anymore, but I'm anti-bad meetings, a recurring meeting that was going to last an hour and a half every single week, and we were going to stick to the same agenda, which sounds very boring to me.
The creative in you just had to hate that idea, right?
I hate the idea, but I love the results from it, it turns out. And now I'm looking forward to it. I've got a place to put issues. When we got something we need to talk about, no problem. I'm going to put it on the issues list, and we will deal with it on Friday when we get to our leadership team meeting. We will go through and we'll talk about wins. It's nice to start off a meeting with, hey, what's winning look like for you in life right now, personally and professionally? Then we'll talk about, what does our scorecard look like? What kind of headlines are we reviewing? What are some big things people need to know about? We don't need to do anything about, you just need to know about. And then ultimately, what are the issues that we're tackling? What tasks did we say we were going to do last week? Did we do them? It creates an automated accountability system that actually reduces the stress of holding somebody accountable. A lot of leaders struggle with holding people accountable. And one of the reasons that they struggle with holding people accountable, I have too, is that it's sporadic in its nature versus if there's a weekly cadence that's expected. Hey, we're going to review what's working, and we're going to look at, hey, last week you said you were going to do this. Did it get done? No. Why not? What else is holding you back? How can I help remove a roadblock? It's normal now. It's just part of the system. And so I'm not attacking the person. I'm not criticizing them. I'm just looking at what they said they were going to do by when they said they were going to do it by and say, are we there yet? And having that automated plan in place creates so much freedom for everybody, and it makes everybody feel like, oh, it's not like a surprise that I'm meeting with Jay to kind of sort this out. We have a scheduled meeting to sort through this already. No problem.
I love that you touched on leadership there, because oftentimes, especially in a creative agency, we spend more time thinking about, well, when should I check on this? Because no one likes that text from the agency owner, right? Where are we at with this? Or can you give me an update on this client? Or this seems to be an issue, but you don't want to just let that linger. But if you don't have a spot for that, I completely agree with you as someone who has taken part in those regular weekly L10 or level 10 meetings. It just creates that expectation of accountability and takes kind of the stress and the thinking out of how do we do accountability to just making it normal. On the topic of leadership, Jay, I wanted to ask, one of the things in your journey with EOS was starting down the path of self-implementing and then deciding to engage an EOS certified implementer. What can you tell us about those steps in the journey for folks who are maybe considering EOS for the first time, or maybe they've tried it in their agency and it hasn't gone as expected or as smoothly maybe as they wanted?
Yeah, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, especially creative industry entrepreneurs, are kind of anti-system initially. At least I was. They don't want to be like the big corporations, and so they buck all these things that actually are really helpful when done rightly. For me, when I read the book, I thought, oh, we could just take some of these ideas and just use them. And to be fair, that probably is better than not doing it, but you're not getting the full benefit. It's like we always say, and many people that are listening to this may be running marketing agencies or similar types of organizations, clients can do some stuff for themselves if they want, but it's not going to be as good, hopefully, as you doing it for them or bringing in an expert to actually do it. So for a couple of years, actually, we just kind of took some of the tools out of the book. And we're like, we'll just kind of do this. We'll kind of do the level 10, but I don't really like this. And then I step back and I'm like, hold on. This is being done by thousands, maybe tens of thousands of organizations around the world, maybe more than that. Mm-hmm. And they've figured this out. Like, what makes me think I have a better way? And do I actually have a better way, or am I just fooling myself? And I found that I really needed some outside counsel to come in and just look at the whole thing and walk us through the system properly. And when we did that, that's when we really started getting traction. We're like, oh, this thing actually works. Because it turns out leaders of organizations need to be held accountable as well. And the beauty of bringing in an outside person who you trust and who has experience is you can give them the permission to hold you accountable as a leader. And that's of exceptional value when you don't have anybody else that can tell you no or tell you that you're doing things wrong. Now, look, if you got a good leadership team, you got people on there that are telling you no, they're telling you but it is different. It's different when you have an outside looking in, and everybody that's listening knows this to be true because it's so much easier for me to evaluate somebody else's marketing when I'm looking from the outside in, going, well, obviously, if you just did this, this, and this, but they've had blinders on the whole time. That's true for all of us, and so bringing in an implementer was when we really started to gain momentum because we were following the system. We had somebody else to hold all of us accountable, and that made all the difference.
Keeping with that theme of accountability, and I love what you said there of recognizing where we can come in as an agency and maybe we're working with a marketing team and they have their blinders on, and we know that we can bring this outside perspective that is going to help them, taking a step back and saying, am I kind of being like my clients here and having the blinders on? I think that is a great analogy that might prompt a bit of a mental shift for other agencies listening to this. The other thing for us, when I was a part of an agency podcast production shop, Sweetfish, when we implemented EOS, it really was a game changer. And one of the mental unlocks for us was the visionary and integrator relationship and the distinctions between those two roles. We realized we really didn't have an integrator, and a lot of the things that we were facing were a lack of defining those two roles and then finding who was in the right seat. So what was that journey like for you guys at Business Builders in recognizing the visionary and integrator roles and figuring out who sits in those seats, as they often say in EOS?
For those of you who aren't familiar with the term, the visionary is typically the leader of the organization. They're more entrepreneurial in nature. They're more likely to be like, hey, what about this? What about that? They're more likely to be squirrel chasers to some extent, and they're more likely to be really good at developing big relationships over time. What they're not as good at is actually getting things done and carrying out that mission. Now, a lot of people will wing it, which I did for a long time, but you realize over time that's not actually me. And so you got to put the right people in the right seats. The integrator is more likely to go, all right, I've heard the vision of the company. I'm aligned with that vision. I agree with that vision. I'm on board for the goals that we've set in place. Now, how do we actually get those things done? Who do we need? Is the team aligning with the scorecard? Are people, do people get their roles? Do they want them? Do they understand them? Do they have the capacity for them? Those things matter a lot. And so having the right person in those seats, it frees you up, if you are the visionary at the company, to do what you're really good at. And at the end of the day, that's how companies really scale and thrive, is putting everybody in a seat, including you as a leader, to do the things that you are gifted and made to do. And if you're having to do a bunch of other stuff, Michael Hyatt has a great book called Free to Focus, and he talks about this idea of finding things that you're really good at and you really love. And when you have those two things together, man, you got some real power on your hands. I love being on stages, whether it's a digital stage like this on a podcast or a physical stage. I love the opportunity to go out and share ideas. It just so happens that when I do that, we also often gain more business as well. But I would like to be able to go do that event and then hand that off to the next team member, which is the integrator on our team, and really the whole team, and let them carry it on from there, But if I'm the one having to implement every strategy that I come up with, it's probably not going to go very well. So getting the right people in the right seats is huge. And when you're smaller, you can't always just automatically have a visionary and integrator. Sometimes you do have to do both those roles for a while. And that's okay. That's normal. But at some point, you got to be able to separate yourself. There's been a few instances where I've seen people who maybe they started the company and they're actually a better integrator over time, and they got to find a better visionary. It's an unusual setup, but occasionally it happens. But at the end of the day, you got to find what you're gifted at and made to do, and then figure out who needs to do what else, not how you're going to get it done.
Oh, I love that. I've been hearing more and more people bring up, I forget the author's name, Who Not How.
Dan Sullivan.
Have you read, say that again?
It's Dan Sullivan, and it's a book called Who Not How. Frankly, that's the entire book. You can just not read it and just keep that phrase in your mind, or you can read it too. It's a great book. But that idea of, the question is not how am I going to get this done? The question is, who can help me get this done? And the beauty of it is, people sometimes think, well, you're just handing everything off. I'm like, no, I'm creating opportunities for people. It's amazing because there's somebody who thrives. Like my virtual assistant, for example, she's so good. Like, I'll send her things that to me, when I look at them, I think this is the most painful piece of nuanced detail I got to deal with. And she's like, oh, thanks for sending this. This is great. Like, she's excited about it because it's what she's made to do. Praise God, But for me, that's not my thing. And so finding the right people, who needs to do something, not how am I going to get it done. It's a game changer of an idea.
I love that. It's been coming up more and more in conversations. And I think you touched on something there. As leaders, there can be two things that maybe come into play. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Jay, when we look at delegating, or we look at, I'm not the visionary and the integrator, once we realize what those two roles are. One can be pride. Hey, I've pulled myself up by my bootstraps and I've built the business up into this point, and I've done so many of these things myself. And if I delegate it, maybe it's not going to be done the way that I want. And the other piece is maybe compassion for our team, because as we start to delegate, which EOS talks about a ton, we feel like, well, I'm just kind of passing stuff out. Like, what am I really doing if I'm not executing the whole way there? And so would you say that those are maybe two components that a lot of agency owners face when they're getting to this spot and figuring out how to delegate, how to get the right people in the right seats and focus on just what they're good at?
Yeah, I think we love to tell ourselves lies that are perpetrated over time, like, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. That is just not true. I used to believe things like that, whether I would say it out loud, but I certainly would act in a way that showed that I believed it because I couldn't help try and get my hands in and do the thing. But if you look back at the work that I produced many moons ago, 24 plus years ago by myself, and you look at the work that our agency produces now, which I do not have anything to do with other than leading the company, which one is better? The one that we're doing now is much better. Why? Because I've hired experts and I've let them be experts at the thing that they're experts at. Most entrepreneurs, most visionaries are not experts at all of the things. You can't be. You can't, there are no unicorns, right? It's like companies think that they can hire a marketing director and there's going to be able to be a designer and a copywriter and a developer and a strategist and an AI prompt expert now and who knows what else. And that person doesn't exist. I've done this stuff since I was 12 years old and I'm not that person. I'm better at Photoshop than 80% of the people, in the world maybe, but not better than 80% of designers. And so we have to be willing to go, hey, you know what? Even if I think I can do it better, which is probably just our own ego talking and not actually the truth, it's better if I can get a couple of other people to do it 80% of the way of what I think I can do, and the outcome long-term is a scaling business that doesn't totally depend on you. And that's why, a few years ago during 2020, I took 30 days off. I took 30 days off and did not answer text messages or emails about my company. I took an RV trip with our 5 kids around the entire country. And you know what? The business thrived without me. That can't be done unless you're willing to delegate things over time and build a team that is actually, in the long term, going to do it better than you. But our own ego's got to be willing to let go of that and go, the real joy is in building a team of experts who are able to accomplish more, because as a team, we can always accomplish more than any individual can.
Jay, you mentioned earlier for you, there was this kind of angst or this resistance to EOS or just systems in general because you're naturally creative. And we're talking to other agencies on this show. And I think there's some of that tension that we've got to recognize as well. In the middle of EOS, the middle word is operating. And there's always going to be this tension between operational efficiency and creativity, or maybe just a perceived tension. How has that kind of manifest itself within your agency, not just for you as an individual that you touched on earlier, but your team? How do you guys balance that tension between creativity and operational efficiency?
Well, I think it's important to remember that constraints can actually empower creativity, not the other way around. A great book on this, or at least it mentions the idea, is Creativity, Inc. by Ed Catmull. Ed was the third guy of Pixar: Steve Jobs, John Lasseter, and Ed Catmull. That book is spectacular, and he talks about intentional constraints within a business. Or you could even think like, man, when an artist is painting on a canvas, the canvas is only a certain size. It has a border. It has an edge. And they have to stay within that edge. And what happens? Well, they're actually able to be more creative because they know where the boundary is. And so, I think businesses like that too. There has to be some kind of boundary or edge, and the right operating systems, the right processes create that, and they actually can produce more creativity in the long run versus this anarchy way of running a business of things just being like fly by the seat of your pants. And so I don't think that constraints, processes, and systems reduce creativity. I actually think that they enhance them. And there's plenty of examples of that being true in the business world.
I love that analogy of the canvas. The other thing that came to mind was, when Michelangelo was painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, right? Well, there's a creative constraint that this is going to be viewed from down on the floor and the height and all those sorts of things. So I do want to continue down this path of talking about the people on the team. We talked a good bit about how a system like EOS impacts leadership. You touched on a few things there on our own ego as leaders, some of the struggles we have with delegating. A big part that you alluded to earlier with EOS that can be helpful for agencies is the accountability chart. And one of the things that kind of was an aha moment for me personally in my own introduction to EOS was looking at the accountability chart. What does the business need? And focus on the structure and the roles, and then putting the right people in the right seat. Where do you think Why is that such a big game changer, especially in building your team as an agency?
Well, I think a lot of times we don't take the time to sit down and go, what jobs do we actually have here? What roles do we actually need? And there's other books that kind of allude to this and overlap in a really beautiful way, like E-Myth by Michael Gerber. He talks about, all the hats you got to wear. Good to Great by Jim Collins talks about seats on a bus. And then Traction kind of packages that in a way with the accountability chart where we can actually lay that out both. And I like to do it a current version and then go, hey, what does this look like 3 years from now? And it doesn't mean that 3 years from now we're actually going to be there, because we probably won't. It'll be different, because things change over time. But it gives us an alignment of a direction of where we need to go. And I think one of the biggest frustrations with most team members inside organizations and of leaders is misplaced expectations. If I expect this and you expect that, and those two things are too far apart, we have a real problem. And communication bridges those expectations. And so what we do is we steal an idea from Dave Ramsey called the KRA, Key Result Area document, and it's combined with kind of the Traction accountability role setup. And in Traction, the role has 3 to 5 kind of primary objectives for that role. And Dave does this with a KRA, where you're outlining these 3 to 5 things that basically say, if you're doing these things, you're winning at your job. And it's very quantifiable. I can sit down with somebody and look at those 5 things and go, hey, red, yellow, green, each one of these for me. Where are you at? Usually, sometimes, or rarely. And they go, well, I think I'm sometimes on this one. And I'm like, no, I think you're actually usually on that one. And the other one, they go, I think I'm sometimes on this one. I'm like, nah, I think you're actually rarely on that one. Well, that's red. What are we going to do about that? What are you? And really the question is not what am I going to do as leader, but what are you going to do to elevate yourself back up to a place where you're accomplishing that role? And then what Traction does from a people analyzer perspective is it just asks 3 simple questions. Do they get it? Do they understand the job? Do they want it? People need to want the job they're doing, or they're not going to be good at it. And do they have the capacity for it? Mental capacity, emotional capacity, intellectual capacity, relational capacity, whatever that may be. It's going to vary based on the role.
I like that you call out capacity beyond just not time to do it or the skill set, right?
That's right. It matters a lot because, I've found in certain roles where like a real high level of relational connection is involved. What if that person's like a super introvert and really good at a lot of detailed tasks, but relational connections are not a big thing for them? Like they don't have the capacity for that role if that's true. And that's okay. We got to find the right seat for them. Hopefully we have one. But when we evaluate people, it becomes very simple now because we look at that role definition and we go, do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have the capacity for it? And if the answer is no, we don't necessarily just fire them on the spot. Actually, we never do that. We have a conversation and we talk through it and see where we need to go. And then we look at our core values, which are drawn up on the wall behind me for people that are watching the video. And I look at those 6 core values and they self-evaluate and they go, I usually, sometimes, or rarely align with that value. And we have we have a goal. A stated goal is that of the 6 core values for us, 4 of them you are usually aligned with, and no more than 2 are you sometimes aligned with, and none of them are you rarely aligned with. If I put red on one of those, or one of the leaders does, or they put themselves there as rarely aligned with that core value, then there's a problem to solve. And so it makes it very quantifiable, makes it really clear. Everybody knows what the grading scale is, and they all know if they're winning or not. And that matters a ton for morale amongst a team.
That idea of am I winning or not, I think is so critical. And it causes a lot of stress when you don't know if you're winning or not. That can manifest itself as the agency owner. I'm not sure if we're winning or not, but also on the individual level. So you touched on something there, Jay. I love the framework that EOS gives us to evaluate the person in the right seat with the GWC. Do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have the capacity to do it? And that's not an evaluation of the person. That's an evaluation of the person in the fit in the role that they're in. And then higher level, you've got the values, which that's a little bit more go, no go with the framework that you laid out there. So how about those situations, Jay? It can come up where you realize, hey, we've got a great person. They're in the wrong seat. But maybe we can find another seat for them. Or you recognize someone, you meet them, at Inbound or another marketing conference that we're at, and you're just like, there's an opportunity to hire this person, but we don't have a seat for them. I think oftentimes agencies, we can kind of play the shuffle game with people because, oh, they've been so loyal and we're like a family here. That's a conversation for a whole other podcast of, do we refer to the team as a team or a family? But for those instances where you don't necessarily have the right seat for someone, but they're the right person, how has that played out? Any stories that maybe folks could learn from there?
Gosh, I'd love to tell you that I have this all figured out, but I do not. But I have plenty of stories.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. Story time. Let's do it.
I think that it's not always black and white. And traction, I think, if you read it straight through and just abide by the system, it's probably more black and white than I would be. And there's a cost to that for me that I have to be willing to pay with regards to frustration or time or money, and I'm willing to pay that. But I think that there are times where you have an exceptional team member who is fully aligned with the core values, but the role they're in is not the right fit for them. But you don't actually technically have another role open. I think that the creative entrepreneur has the capacity to look around the company and go, well, what's possible? Is there another seat that could be created or could be adjusted that would be a great fit for this person and provides the value to the company for creating that seat? Like, that's the kicker.
It's got to have the and, right?
That's right. And I tell our team all the time, money in business is really straightforward. Whether I'm dealing with a client or with a team member, it's always the same. When we're working with clients, they pay us their money because the value we're providing in services is of worth more money, or more value, I should say, than the money that they're giving us. That's it. It's the same reason that a company of any size employs a person. They are paying that person because that person produces more value than what they're paying. It's the only reason that it makes sense for a client to hire us is for them to give us money because the value we're providing is more. It's the only reason it makes sense for a for-profit business to hire somebody is because the value they're creating is more, because that's the only way you can stay in business. And people will sometimes look at that and go, well, Jay, that doesn't sound very caring for people. And I'm like, yes, it is caring for people because people deserve to be in roles where they create exceptional value. They do. And people have exceptional value. And so if the role that they're in is not producing that value, it doesn't mean that person is wrong or broken. It means that role is the wrong seat for them. And so do we have another role for them? Maybe. I will say that the times that I have tried this over time to kind of morph a role into somebody, it is often a ticking time bomb for when that person's going to leave. Not always true, but it often is. And so you just have to be prepared for that and just have really open, honest conversations throughout time. I've got one right now that we're working on. I just came out of a meeting actually with a team member going, all right, what does your future look like? She's super ambitious. I'm trying to help her find a path forward, and she's trying to help herself find a path forward. It's not all on me, And I have a couple different things that I think could work, but it's not all like ironed in stone. And so you got to be willing to navigate that together to help find what's best for everybody, because at the end of the day, I want a team full of people that are of exceptional value to the company and to our clients, and I want our company to be of exceptional value to the people that work here. And if that's true, everybody's winning, and that's ultimately the goal.
I love that goal. Absolutely. And I love what you said there about, people have value just because you're kind of reducing it, quote unquote, to the value they provide versus what's being paid, whether that's an employee within the agency or the agency to your customers. It doesn't take the humanity out of it if we look at it with the right lens. And one of the things I've heard you mention in our other conversations, Jay, is that you have those conversations with folks, I think, can help in those situations, as opposed to trying to shove the square peg in the round hole that creates that ticking time bomb of, Jay's not really right here. Let's try and make a fit for him. Is you talk about their last day. It's cool on LinkedIn to say ex Google, ex Amazon, whatever. But I think in our agency, we can talk about the one day where you're ex business builders. And that takes a little bit of the awkwardness out of those conversations, right?
Yeah, I love having a conversation like that with a team, or especially a brand new, like we're about to onboard a new guy next week. And that'll be one of the conversations that I'll have with him, which is like, hey, tell me what your last day here looks like. That's such an interesting question to ask. What does your last day here look like? Now, Maybe it's a year from now. Maybe it's 25 years from now. I don't know. But I want it to be good. And the same is true for clients. I don't really ask clients that question, but I do think about it. It might be an interesting question to ask them, actually. For example, I had a client the other day who reached out to me and asked me to come speak at an event. Well, I actually thought, frankly, that our engagement didn't go very well because they're using a different agency now, and I don't know. You just never know what people are actually thinking. But he's inviting me to come speak at an event. Why? Because we did our best to not burn that bridge at the end, And I want that with team members. I've got plenty of people who have spent, sometimes years here and now are off doing their own things or working at other places. And that's very encouraging to me. That's not discouraging. My company is not the best long-term fit for every person who steps in the door and starts working here. But for some it is. And for others, it's going to be a great stepping stone for whatever their future holds. And I think that's amazing. What a great opportunity. It's easy to feel bitter about it. There's a quote attributed to Henry Ford, which he probably didn't say, but because, the internet, but who knows?
Yeah, that's
it
the way
says
it goes,
this.
right?
That's right. The only thing worse than training someone well and them leaving is not training them well and them staying. And so I would rather build a culture where I'm creating exceptional growth opportunities for people that maybe one day will leave. Probably one day will leave. That's something we just have to wrap our heads around. It is very unlikely that your current staff, it's almost impossible that your current staff is going to be the same staff 20 years from now. And frankly, if it is just that, there might be something else wrong.
Yeah, that's a really good call out.
Sometimes you make it too good for people in a way that they actually shouldn't be there. And you're
it's
actually
not good for the company.
back.
It's not good for them. They're stagnant.
That's right.
And not growing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes I think when you let people go, you are doing that. You're letting them go. You're setting them free to create an opportunity that maybe is different or better than what you have now.
So good, so good. Well, Jay, as we round out the conversation today, we want to make time for our final two segments, as we always do here on Agency Life. We've got our Fast Five, and we're going to give you an opportunity to give someone a shout out that has impacted your journey as an agency leader. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's do it. Number one, if someone gave you $120K a year, 10K a month, no strings attached to better run your agency, how would you use that extra additional revenue right now for business builders?
Gosh, that's an impossible question. I don't know how I would use that because I feel like I could go make more if I want to make more. I'd probably just experiment with new things. I'd probably do some different event-based stuff. I'm doing a lot of event stuff right now, but events can be expensive and they're a little bit risky. So I'd probably do some more event-based things and just see how they go, take a little bit more risks than maybe I would otherwise.
I like that. Well, you've already dropped, I think, 3, 4, maybe 5 book recommendations to us. But number 2 on our Fast Five is, what are your all-time favorite business books? So is there one more that you would add to the growing list of recommendations from Jay today?
Yeah, I love EntreLeadership by Dave Ramsey. That book really changed my life from a business perspective. It gave me insights from the trenches. I go to a lot of his events, but that book's been spectacular.
Good call out for sure. Jay, this is my favorite of our 5 Fast Five questions. What's one mistake you've made in running your agency that you'll never forget?
Promoting people too soon. Trying to give them, force them into leadership when they're not ready to lead. It's a bad thing to do for the company. It's a bad thing to do for the person.
It's a good call out that it has implications on both sides. Final 2 here, Jay. What would you say is the hardest part of agency life, and what do you think is the best part of agency life?
I think the hardest part is just how fast our industry changes. I mean, that fits my personality really well, but it is tricky. I think the best thing is being able to see the results. When you're good at what you do, you help other people accomplish their dreams and missions and goals and grow their companies and provide for their families and teams. And that's really purposeful work. And I think that's great.
I love it. All right, Jay, as we've talked about here, there's only so much we can do individually. And that was evident in the story that you told, getting to that place as an agency owner and recognizing that. Who's one person you would want to give a shout out that has impacted your career journey and your journey through agency life?
Gosh, there's so many, but currently I actually think of a small group of guys versus one person. There's a group of guys that all own agencies.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I like to break the rules, Clay and Wes and Tyler and Kurt and Rob, just a great group. We got a little text thread going. They all own their own agencies. They're all at varying sizes, different parts of the country, and it's such an encouragement to have people who will walk alongside you, not just in business, but we pray for each other's marriages and families and care about each other actually more than just how do we create more money. And at the end of the day, man, having a community like that is priceless.
It really is. So speaking of community, as we round it out today, Jay, for folks who maybe aren't already connected with you and the team at Business Builders, what would be the best way for them to connect with you? Hopefully they've gotten a ton of value. I really think they have from the tips you've given on EOS and how it's helped you scale your agency, as well as some good stuff on the people and talent side as we rounded out the conversation today. What's the best ways to stay in touch with you?
Yeah, if you are interested in ideas to grow your agency or business as a whole, I share a lot of those on my channels. The easiest way to find all of that information is to go to jowenlive.com. I've got a book on there, a podcast on there, and other resources that may be helpful, all free and hopefully helpful.
Well, thanks for joining me on the mic again today, Jay. I get a ton out of every conversation with you, and I love every time we're able to record it and share it with more people. So thank you for being our guest on Agency Life today.
Thanks for having me.